heliocentric model. Um, with all the background that we've gotten into out of the way, we need to remember that the heliocentric model necessitates that the light that we see coming from the planets is reflected from the sun. This means that given the conditions needed to see Venus, for starters, it would be a very rare chance to catch Venus in the sky, since its orbital path is allegedly tighter around the sun than the Earth's. Meaning, if the conditions were somehow in place to have a line of sight towards Venus, it would not be fully lit, but instead it would only be partially lit due to the angle of the reflected sunlight. Um, I will slightly modify or correct my previous claim that Venus would never be visible, and instead assert with certainty that according to the heliocentric model, Venus should probably not be visible from Earth, although there may be very rare circumstances when it would be visible, or at least a line of sight may be achievable in such rare circumstances. However, in these cases, it would only be partially lit due to the angle of reflection from the sun. This is still a stretch, as I still reserve the possibility that the proclaimed orbital path and distances of Earth compared to Venus, along with the daytime sky obstructing all celestial lights, coupled by the fact that the sunlight lingers above the horizon for longer than it technically should, which means that our angle away from Venus's orbital path would be exacerbated by this fact. Finally, the tangent line of sight from an observer on the Earth from the evening side, or morning side of the Earth towards Venus would be divergent to the orbital path of Venus, and I believe that it is still a good possibility, or still maybe up in the air, but I reserve the possibility that according to the heliocentric model, Venus would be rendered invisible forever due to everything I've just mentioned. But even granting the heliocentric model the visibility of Venus under very special circumstances, the orbital path of Mercury, on the other hand, would undoubtedly never intersect with the line of sight of any observer during the sunset, twilight, or early evening hours. It's impossible. That would never happen. Mercury itself should not ever be visible from Earth, period. Its orbital path would simply never intersect with our line of sight during any period other than daytime, since we all know that you can't see the stars or the planets, the wandering stars during the day. The heliocentric model simply does not work, as we can view the wandering star Mercury after sunset, well after sunset. This observation simply doesn't work in the heliocentric model, given the fact that the atmosphere is opaque during the day, and Jupiter's orbital path would only be within our line of sight during the, I'm sorry, Mercury's orbital path would only be within our line of sight during the day. And again, Venus, I would say, probably falls under this same category. It's very close, but certainly Mercury. So essentially, this falsifies the heliocentric model. Now, I found an interesting thread. I was searching online for information about, Venus's visibility, and I'm going to read through this. As some random astronomer was baffled by the fact that Venus was visible years before Flat Earth came out, and this guy was making observations that obviously didn't make any sense in the heliocentric model. And what you'll see happen was people just sort of convinced him that they knew better and that he didn't have a point. But they totally didn't talk about Mercury. Okay, so I ran into this thread on a general discussion forum on giantbomb.com. I'll put a link in the description, but this was from 6 years, 5 months ago. Uh, I need an astronomer or a planetary science man to explain this to me, but apparently you can see Venus in the night sky. How does that even work? This story's explanation makes no sense whatsoever, and there's a link to the story that they give as to why it's possible that Venus is visible in the night sky. I read into it, doesn't make much sense, like he said. I mean, and I'm continuing with the quote. I mean, at night, the planet is dark because the surface we're living on is facing away from the damn sun. We see the moon because the moon is behind us as well as reflecting the light off the sun. But how is it possible to look at Venus when that bloody planet on an inner orbit? Like, logically, if you think about it, there's no way to look at Venus while we're away from its general direction, so there's no way for its light to even reach our faces. This is driving me nuts. Then you get a bunch of people who try to explain this away from him, and eventually, and the guy, like, you can read it for yourself. I'm not going to read the entire article, but I will link it up. Um, the guy's making some pretty, interesting arguments. Again, this is not to scale. I'll go through something that's a lot closer to scale here in a minute. But if you notice, they don't show Mercury in this because indeed Mercury would be invisible, and as I've already mentioned, the angular size of Venus and Mercury, according to the laws of reality and how optics work, they would technically be too small to see by, especially Mercury, a 3,000 mile diameter object being visible a minimum of 77 million miles away. It's physically impossible, especially considering the darn thing would be, half lit or a quarter lit, with an indirect reflection is all that we would see of it if it could be seen. But just thought this article was funny. Check it out. Again, the Globers ultimately win and make the guy feel stupid and convince him that Venus would be visible from the night side of the Earth. Um, but yeah, I thought it was funny because it was 6 years ago. This guy was really onto something. He couldn't. He found a glitch in the matrix, a glitch in the heliocentric model, and it's almost like they put Neo back to sleep. So he took the I guess he took the blue pill or whatever.